Aloha, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Skep Live Online, a production of the University of Hawaii Presents, based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Outreach College. My name is Tim Slaughter, your host for today. I'd like to thank today's sponsors, the Hawaii State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, and Kaunoa Senior Services. For the next 3 weeks, we're excited to once again present the Fall International Storyteller Series in collaboration with the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. We're joined by tellers from around the world every morning at 10 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time. We're excited to have you join us and would love to stay in touch, so give us comments and questions throughout today's chat window and let us know what you're thinking. Also, if you send your email to csinfo, that's CSINFO at hawaii.edu, you'll get notices about upcoming programs. We're very happy to have with us today Ingrid Nixon. Ingrid Nixon is an award winning, world traveling storyteller who whisks listeners away on journeys of the imagination. Exploration nail biters, tall tales, traditional and personal stories. She tells them all on international expeditions and at venues around the country, including the National Storytelling Festival. She is a champion liar many times over and, no lie, holds a master's in storytelling from East Tennessee State University. She currently hails from Southeast Alaska. So let's welcome to Skep Live Online, Ingrid Nixon.
Thank you, Tim. It is so nice to be with you all here today, and kind of a miracle that I can come to you from Southeast Alaska all the way down there to Hawaii. There are so many connections between where I am and if you think of the United States as the neighborhood, and then Alaska and Hawaii, we are the youngest kids on the block. And when you look at that whole contiguous, that state of the contiguous United States, Alaska and Hawaii, we're always grouped together down in the little corner. And to this day, I am convinced Hawaii is the same size as Alaska. It's got to be. But Alaska is a place where myth and with fact they wind together. And so this is my first of two stories that I'll be sharing with you this morning. Now, as Tim mentioned, my husband and I, we work together in expedition tourism. We lead trips all over the world. But one of our favorite things to do is to lead trips in Alaska. Now, these are places, these are itineraries we have often put together ourselves, going to places where we've lived or special places to us. And one such place is Homer, Alaska. Some of you may have been there. It's in South Central Alaska. But what people usually like to do, among the many things on a trip in Alaska, is to go to a crusty fisherman bar and perhaps meet a crusty fisherman. So there I am. I'm leading a trip in, and we are in Homer, Alaska. And so I ask my group, who would like to go to the bar tonight? Now, in Homer, there happens to be a bar. It's called the Salty Dog. It's right there by the boat haven. It's a log building. It's sinking into the ground. It's got sawdust floors. It's perfect. So who wants to go to the dog? And in the end, there are about 7 of us. So we wrap up our dinner and then we make our way over to the dog. And when we get to the dog, we push open the door and the bar is totally dead. At the bar, there are 2 crusty fisherman types, and there are a couple people sitting at tables, but I mean, that's it. But we're there. So we pull up our chairs and everybody arrange the tables, people get their beverage of choice, and we all sit down and we start talking. And people are talking about the trip, which has been amazing. They're talking about the great wildlife, the beautiful scenery, the great weather we've had. And there's this man in the group. He's this big, friendly man. And at some point, he leans back in his chair And he says, well, now I have one regret in life, and that is I did not come to Alaska as a young man. Now, he says this at a time where the bar, which is quiet already, is totally silent. So his words just kind of go out into the room and just sort of hang in the air. And I see one of the crusty fisherman types sitting at the bar kind of turn and look at us over his shoulder. And then he swivels on his bar stool, stands up, picks up his beer, and starts walking in our direction. And I'm like, oh no. And he's got on his brown, extra tough rubber boots and his stained canvas pants and his wool herringbone fisherman jacket. And he's got this salt and pepper beard and this salt and pepper hair, neither of which has been trimmed in some time. And he walks up to that big, friendly man and says, oh, yeah? Well, I came to Alaska as a young man. And the big, friendly man says, uh-huh, and what'd get you? And the fisherman said, it made me an old man. And the group laughs. And then the big, friendly man is like, well, come on, sit down, join it. Before you know it, somebody's grabbed a chair. We've all sort of scooched around and adjusted. And the fisherman is standing there hesitating. And then he sits down. And the group just starts to pepper him with questions. The big friendly man is like, so you came here as a young man? Well, what did you fish for? Where did you fish? And the fisherman is like, well, I fished in Southeast and Gulf of Alaska and Bering Sea, all the salmon, halibut, herring, king crab, tanner crab. But these days I like to fish close to home. And then one of the women says, are you married? And the fisherman says, I had a woman. She's dead now. And then another woman says, any children? And to this, the fisherman says, you are a nosy bunch. But this little lady who has asked that question, she is so sweet that he softens. And then he says, and the group kind of laughs a little. And then one of the people says, I've been reading about fishing and about all the bycatch that fishermen bring up and some of the unusual things. What is the strangest thing you have ever pulled from the sea? For that, the fisherman looks thoughtful. And then he says, for that, I'm going to need another beer. So the big friendly man, he is at the bar and back with a beer in a nanosecond. And the fisherman, he takes a sip and then he begins. He says, it was about 10 years ago. The woman and I, we had a cabin. We were about 5 miles out of town, we were down at the water, had a little dock that went out, had my own boat. I like to fish alone. And there was this one morning when I was going out, just beautiful day. And I thought, well, I'll just put out a little net, see if I can catch some silver salmon, maybe a king. Take it down to the co-op, sell it, make a little ka-ching. So I got out there, I put out my net. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and just looked at the pellucid sky. Pellucid, that's an Ivy League word. And after about an hour, I thought, well, I'll pull up the net. But when I went back there, I saw the net. It was all fouled, all balled up. And so when I finally got it on my deck, I could see through the net. I could see an arm, a human arm. So I pulled out my knife and I started cutting away at that net. And soon I saw more than an arm. I mean, there was a whole body there. And as I'm cutting away at that net, that body starts to move. And when I'm done, this young man stands up before me, and he's all wrapped in kelp, and he's got one of those physiques. He looks like a statue of those Greek gods. And he's got long blonde hair and these blue eyes. And I tell you what, I mean, I fell in love with him right there. But I'm thinking, one minute he is in my net, he is underwater for God knows how long, and now he's standing before me, and he's not gasping or muttering or nothing. And I didn't know if I was looking at Poseidon or Aquaman. And finally I said to him, "Who are you?" And he answered me in perfect English. He said, "I am the king of the sea. You have captured me, and now I am yours until you release me." Now I thought if I went back to the woman and told her that all of this would happen, she would think that I was smoking dope. And I don't smoke dope anymore. And so I decided, well, I will bring him back home, show him to the woman, and then, I don't know, throw him back. So motoring back home, he just stood out there on deck. He's just looking around with those blue eyes. And when I got back, I'm walking with him down the dock, and the woman comes out of the cabin. She's drying her hands on a towel, and she's looking at him, and she's looking at me like, "What the hell?" And I said, "This is King of the Sea." And she looked him up and down, and I could tell right then and there that, I mean, she fell in love with him too. And finally she says to him, "Mr. King, may I make you a cup of coffee?" And he answers, "Please." Like he drank coffee every day. So we go into the house, she makes a pot of coffee, and we sit there drinking coffee, me, the woman, and the king of the sea. Well, I gave him some of my clothes, and then, we made him a little bed right there so he could sleep by the stove, and we fed him fish, that we had in the freezer, but the woman and I we could bring ourselves to leave the house. We just wanted to be there with the king of the sea, and at night when he was sleeping, we would just sit there and just watch him sleep. I mean, we were both so in love with him. But finally, the freezer, the fish was getting low, so I had to go out and get more fish, and I was getting the boat ready when the king of the sea came up to me and he said, "You don't need a boat. Get a net, just get a net." So I went and got the landing net, the net with a handle, and he took me down to the edge of the water and he said, "Now put the net in the water." And I put the net in the water and I felt this whong, and that net was full of fish, teeming with fish, and fish that you don't normally find close to shore. Well, I did that a few times and we filled up our freezer, and then I had enough fish to take to the co-op and sell, and I made a little ka-ching, and I had a little bit of money in my pocket, and that felt good. I ended up doing that quite a few times, selling the fish, but then there was this day when I had just sold the fish in the co-op, and there was this guy there. His name is Bert, big guy, ugly as a can of paint. And I'm turning to leave, and Bert says to me, "Hey, Bud, come on, tell me where are you doing your fishing? Where's your hidey hole?" Well, my heart, it just started pounding. But I said, Bert, I can't tell you that. Bring me bad luck. And I turned and left, but my heart was pounding because I knew what we were doing was getting noticed. So when I got home, I went to the woman and I'm like, "We can't do that anymore." And she said, "Come on, Bud. This has been so good for us. Now just think about it. I mean, he could be our retirement." Retirement. I gotta say, I sold fish one more time. And this time when I was leaving the co-op, there was Bert. Bert said, "Hey, Bud, what can you tell me about the king of the sea?" And, oh man, I felt my blood in my veins. I drove home. I'm driving home. There is only one way he could have learned about the king. And when I got home, I went in the cabin. There's the woman. She's drinking coffee with the king. I said to her, "How could you?" And she knew exactly what I was talking about. And she said, "Oh, come on, Bud. It just slipped out. I didn't mean to, but think about it. He could be our ticket out of here. Our ticket out of here. Ticket out of here." So I turned to the king. I said, "King, you need to come with me." And I took his arm and I led him down to the shore. And then I stood there. I turned to him and I said, "King of the sea, I caught you. And now I release you. Go." But the king of the sea, he just stood there looking at me. And so I pushed the king on his shoulder. I pushed him toward the water. I said, "You need to go." But he didn't go. So I grabbed his arm and I went wading out into the water. I mean, I filled my boots. I went up to my waist, up to my chest, and I turned to the king and I said, "King, you've got to go." And that's when he leaned forward and he said, "Come with me." And then he just grabbed me and he pulled me under the water. I didn't have time to grab a breath of air, and I'm under the water and I can feel my lungs just burning. And then finally, I just had to, I could breathe. I could breathe underwater. And I looked at the king and I could see his blue eyes and I could see his hair dancing all around in the water. And for the first time in so long, I felt peace. And then I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I shot to the surface and I took a breath of air. And then I turned toward the shore and there was the woman. And I thought, I can't go back to that. And so I dove under the water again, but this time I couldn't breathe underwater. And the king, he was gone. And I kept diving under again and again and again until I was so cold. And then I just waded to shore and I fell down on my knees and I just cried. The fisherman paused. Then he said, it was after that. The woman got sick, it was bad. So her sister came up to take her back to Arizona. Arizona. Said, I can't let her die in this hellhole. Isn't that funny? You all think this is a paradise. I heard you talking. She thinks this is a hellhole. And I don't know how to exist anywhere else. And then the fisherman turned to the big friendly man and said, you talk about regret. Not a day goes by, not a day, when I don't think about the king, when I don't think about seeing him underwater, his blue eyes, his hair dancing all around, and how I could breathe and that peace I felt. Not a day goes by when I don't wish I could go with it. The fisherman was silent. The group was silent. And the fisherman, he drained his beer. And then he stood up and he wiped his hands on his stained canvas pants. And he slipped through the chairs of our circle. And we all watched silently as he walked across that sawdust floor pushed open the door, and disappeared into the night. That is my Alaskan version of a classic folk tale, a Scottish traveler tale known as The King of the Sea. So, for my second and final story that I'll share with you, I'll take you to where I am right now in Glacier Bay National Park, Southeast Alaska. And I am sitting on the beach in Southeast Alaska. It is September, it is evening, so it is dark. And I am many, many miles from the closest streetlight. And so the darkness that is around me is primordial. And so as I look up at the night sky from horizon to horizon, I see stars. And the quality of the darkness is such that it is as if every star is calling out, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." But on this night, I am not there to see stars. No, I am watching and waiting. And then at last I see it. It is on the northern horizon. It is low. It is this green spear of light. And I watch as this green spear of light grows and begins to morph. And this green, it is a fluorescent green. And as this green spear morphs, all of a sudden there is this band of green light that stretches above me across the night sky. And I watch as that band of light continues to change, and all of a sudden, it is like a curtain of light that is hanging down so close to me. And then, as if it is blown by a cosmic breeze, that curtain of light begins to ripple. And the spectacle of the northern lights is such that I just begin to laugh. And I think of the early people who looked up at the night sky and what they thought was happening there. For some people, the northern lights were caused by a cosmic fox that was running through the heavens and light was shooting off its tail. For others, the lights were caused by reflections off the shield of women warriors who were marching into battle. And for still others, the lights were caused by elders who are up in the night sky playing a game where they are kicking around a ball which is made from a walrus's head. But as I look up at these northern lights, I think, no wonder they thought this is the stuff of gods. Now, I know what the scientists say, how the scientists say that the origin of the northern lights is actually far, far away from Earth. And that even though they feel so close, they are actually occurring high up in our atmosphere, that place where Earth's atmosphere is just giving way to space. And how there are two places on the planet where the lights are most consistent. They're the places where the Earth's magnetic field is curving back toward the planet. So there's a place in the northern latitudes, a place in the southern latitudes, and that place where the lights are most consistent is known as the Aurora Oval. And I know that the scientists say that the lights occur 365 days a year. It's just that some nights they're stronger than other nights, and you have to have darkness to be able to see them. Now, as I watch these lights above my head, I know that it is well known in Alaska that the people who see the lights most consistently are the people who do not have indoor plumbing. Because there has got to be a reward to go out to the privy in the middle of a winter's night. But for the rest of us, there's the app. Because scientists can predict when the lights are going to be strongest. So I know that on this night, the lights are supposed to be very strong. And then for the next few nights, the lights are supposed to be very quiet. But then at the end of the week, on Friday, the lights are supposed to be very intense once again. In fact, they are supposed to be so strong that you'll see them in Alaska, you'll see them down through British Columbia, down through Washington State, even down into the central part of Oregon. Well, the next morning, in the early morning, I am on a small boat and I am making my way out to a large cruise ship which has come to visit the national park. And with me is a small team of rangers. We are going to go onto this cruise ship and offer programming as this ship visits the bay. Now, normally we have seasonal rangers who do this, but it's so late in the season that all of our seasonal rangers are gone. So it's left to those of us who run the program to offer the programs to our visitors. And this ship that we're going to get on has over 4,000 passengers. Over 4,000 passengers and almost as many crew. So on board this one ship, there are about 8,000 people. It is like we are going on board to a small city. And my role on this day is to go up to the lounge. I set out an information desk. I have things for people to read, things for people to touch. And then I just wander around and I talk to people and I point out wildlife and I answer their questions and I help them make sense of what they're experiencing and why we have this national park. And this is why I got into the ranger business. Well, the highlight of any trip to this national park is the time that we spend in front of a Tidewater Glacier. So when we get up to this Tidewater Glacier, the captain, he turns this huge ship sideways. And we tell everybody, get your hat, get your coat, get your gloves, get your camera, your binoculars, get out on deck and just watch this glacier. So there we are. I am standing out on deck. I am in my full ranger regalia, including my flat hat. And as I look down the deck, lining the railings, people. And we are all looking at these high snow-capped mountains, this river of ice that flows down this glacier. We're looking at this wild landscape, the waters. And as I stand there, there's a woman who comes up to me and she says, "Do you work here?" And I say, "Yes." And she says, "Okay, so this is the glacier, right?" And I explained, yes, that high up in the mountains, snowflakes have fallen, a vast accumulation of snowflakes. And soon there are so many snowflakes that they press down on one another. Their sheer volume, the weight, they transform into ice. And then that ice eventually becomes so heavy, it is pulled by gravity. It flows down the mountain. And in the case of a Tidewater Glacier, it flows all the way down to the sea. Well, then a couple comes up to me, and the woman says, "Ranger, tell my husband the word for when a chunk of ice breaks off the glacier and falls into the water." So I say, "Calving." And I see her jab him, and she's like, "See?" And I'm suddenly worried that my knowledge is contributing to this marital discord. But the husband, he has good humor. So he steps up and he says, "Calving? Why calving?" And I explained that it seems as though the early glaciologists who studied glaciers, that it reminded them of cows, that how a cow drops a calf, gives birth to the calf. So it was that a glacier dropped a chunk of ice and gave birth to an iceberg. So calving. And he says, "Okay." And then he looks at the glacier and he says, "Well, make it calve." And I laugh. And he says, "No, I mean, can't you get the captain to blow the ship's horn or something?" As if the puny vibrations from the horn of a ship, even a ship this large, could cause that glacier to calve. So I tell him he has to be patient, he has to listen and watch. And sure enough, in time, we hear this tremendous crack, and then this chunk of ice the size of a 20-story building breaks off the face of that glacier and just plunges into the water. And everyone around me, there is this, and then this cheering and clapping. And after that, I hear the ship engine start to rumble, and the captain, he starts to maneuver and turn the ship. So the people, they leave the railing. They're going to go onto the other side of the vessel. But as I'm standing there, a woman comes up to me and she looks at that chunk of ice in the water. And then she looks at me and she goes, "How am I supposed to feel about that?" That's a tough question. So I ask her, "Well, how does it make you feel?" And she says, "Well, it made everybody around me feel glad, but I look at that and I just feel loss. I mean, look, I know what's going on in this planet. Can you tell me, is that glacier going to be around in 100 years?" It's another tough question. So I answer the best I can. I say, the answer to your question rests with you and me and all of us and the choices that we make today. And I really do hope that we make the right choices so that, yeah, that glacier is going to be here in 100 years. And then the woman turns away from me. She looks out over the railing and she's like, "God, I was supposed to be on this cruise with my mom, but she died this spring. And so now I'm on the cruise with my brother. She would have loved this." And I stand there with the woman at the railing and we look at these mountains and this glacier and this wild landscape. And we look at that chunk of ice that is floating in the water. And I say, I think she would. And we stand there talking at the railing for a few minutes, but then I realize that the ship is underway and that I have to go back to the information desk. So we say our goodbyes, and I'm walking down the deck, and suddenly I cannot go 10 feet without people wanting to get their picture taken with a ranger. And there are two pictures taken on that day that I remember. And one was as I walked along, a little boy ran up to me. He's a short little boy. On his chest, he has got this huge gold badge. And he says, "Hey, look at me. I'm a junior ranger. I'm the same as you." Now, I know he had to do some work to get that badge, which he earned from one of my colleagues. So I lean over to him and I say, I had the best feeling about this day. And now I know it's because you were going to become a junior ranger. Now I know that the future of this park is in very good hands. Well, his parents are beaming and they want my photo taken with this boy, and I proudly pose. And then I make my way into the ship, into the lounge. And at the far end of the lounge is the information desk. In this lounge, it is huge. It wraps around the whole front of the vessel, seats about 400 people. But what they've done is they've broken it up into many small sections. And as I'm making my way to the information desk, I'm suddenly like, I don't want to go to the desk, because if I go to the desk, I'm just going to have to pack it up. And that means this day is over and I don't want this to end. And so just randomly, I turn to the right and walk into a section of the lounge. Now, in this small section, there are 6 people. On my left, there's a man and a woman. Near the window, there are 2 elderly women. And then on my right, there are 2 women. And when they turn to look at me, I see they have the same face, separated by a generation. It's a mother and her grown-up daughter. Well, I walk into this section of lounge and someone says, "The ranger's here." And we just start pinging off each other, talking about what an amazing day it's been, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've experienced. And then one of the elderly women who's sitting by the window, she holds up a book and she says, "Now I'm keeping a journal. Ranger, what's your name?" And I say, "Ingrid." Well, then the man says, Ingrid, do we have any chance of seeing the Northern Lights on this trip? And I think, oh, well, where are you going to be on Friday? His wife answers, well, we're going to be in Victoria, British Columbia, and then that night we sail to Seattle. And I say, you are in luck. The lights are supposed to be very strong on Friday. So after it gets dark, just go out on deck and look to the north. Well, then one of the elderly women says, well, what side of the ship is that going to be on? And I say, oh, well, I happen to know it's going to be on the port or the left side of the ship. You see, I grew up on the body of water where Victoria is just right across, a little town known as Port Angeles. Well, that's when the woman on my right says, I live in Port Angeles. You do. So we exchange addresses where she happens to live and then where I grew up, where my mother still lives in the family house at the time. And then one of the elderly women by the window says, well, Ingrid, what's your last name? And I say, Nixon. And that's where the woman on my right says, you're not part of the Nixon family, are you? Now, I have been asked that question many times in my life, but it normally has to do with a different Nixon. But in this case, there is only one Nixon family in Port Angeles. So I say, yes. And she says, I worked with your father. Now, this woman comes over, introduces herself, and tells me that when she was a young surgical nurse, fresh out of school in 1974, she was working in the hospital in Port Angeles. Her first shift, she's in the emergency room. My father is the doctor on call. She says, our first customer, he was a stab wound. But your dad and I, we worked together, we sewed him up, and he survived. And then she proceeds to tell me that there were many days that followed where she stood near my father in the operating room. As he would say, scalpel, she'd give him the scalpel, clamp, clamp, sponge, sponge. And so it was until 1978 when my father died in a plane crash. Well, now her daughter says, well, what happened? And I listen as this retired surgical nurse tells her daughter everything about my father's accident and then talks more about what it was like to work with him. And she finally turns to me and she says, that was just so sad. He was such a nice man. Well, now I want my picture taken with her. And so just as we get our photo taken, we marvel at the chances that we met up on this ship. I don't even normally go on these ships. And then here we are on a ship of 8,000 people. We not only met, we had this conversation. And when I walk away, I have this warm glow in my heart. And it wasn't until several days later that I realized that all had happened because of the Northern Lights. And I thought, of course. Because you see, the Northern Lights occur because there is an explosion on the surface of the sun. And with that explosion, charged particles are thrown into space. And they travel through space towards Earth, carried on the solar wind. And as they get close, they collide with particles in our own atmosphere. And with each one of those collisions, those connections, energy is released. And it is the sum of that energy that makes the Northern Lights, that forms the Aurora Oval, that circles the Earth like a halo and gives off a most extraordinary light. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. That was absolutely fabulous. And Now I know where the northern lights come from as well. That was wonderful. But of course, being an accomplished liar, do we ever really know when you're telling the truth and when you aren't?
We'll just
Um,
see.
yeah. What are you have quite a career as a storyteller from places all around the world. What are some of your most memorable sort of storytelling adventures that you've had?
Well, this will certainly be one of them. But when I'm doing expedition tourism, I tell stories on those. So I've done many, many trips down to the Antarctic and love to share stories of Antarctic exploration. But I would also say I just love exploring the world of folklore and myth and sharing it with eager ears. And every storyteller needs a great story listener. So I'm so appreciative of your people for joining us this afternoon.
Yes,
Well, it's
we have.
afternoon for me.
Yeah, we're getting there. Not quite caught up with you yet.
Yeah.
What is your you told the one story, the first story, which was which I've run into this with some of our other storytellers about how stories themselves seem to travel around the world and reincarnate themselves in different cultures in sort of different ways.
That is something that I find fascinating. But yeah, the whole exploration of different motifs, they find their ways into the cultural fabric of cultures all over the world. And even really disparate cultures will have that same cultural motif. So that whole motif of carrying, of pulling an unusual being out of the sea is something that you will find, here, there, and everywhere. And that was just something really intriguing that I couldn't resist. Had to give it that Alaskan twist.
Oh, it was a wonderful twist to it.
Thank you.
I'm sure you get this asked this a lot, and our listeners like to know too a bit about what brought you into this particular field.
Well, as a ranger, an interpretive ranger, one that gives with the walks and talks, I found that I just intuitively used stories a lot in my ranger programs, but it really wasn't until I went to a festival that I discovered that this platform telling, or just discovered there was a deeper way to explore that. And that was actually in 2003, and I have never looked back. And so I've kind of been in and out of the Park Service through the years. In fact, I'm retiring at the end of November,
Well,
to get back
congratulations.
into thank you, to get back into the storytelling, and expedition tourism more full time.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it was just sort of discovering through a festival. And then, of course, once you become aware, you discover there's storytelling everywhere. And there really is a a a great growth right now in many, storytelling venues, personal stories, and things like that all across the country.
Yeah, it's been wonderful, and it makes sense that the Park Service is a natural sort of way of developing those skills. I mean, one of our other sort of semi-regular tellers, Bobby Norfolk, he came out
Mm,
of the Park Service as well himself. So welcome
right.
aboard. Um, well, we're getting to that time of the morning here, your afternoon, where it's time to wrap things up. I want to thank our sponsors once again, the University of Hawaii, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Hawaii State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, Kainoa Senior Services, Hawaii Book and Music Festival, and you, our audiences, for tuning in. Please be back tomorrow morning. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be doing this for the next 3 weeks, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time, with a special on Halloween that you won't want to miss. 3 tellers at 7 p.m. for those of you that want to tune in. Jeff Keir, Alton Chung, and Kathy Collins. You'll love their spooky stories. But
Mhm.
tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 a.m., we have Nyla Fuji Bab, who will be here to share stories as well. So, Ingrid, thank you once again. It's been a pleasure, and we will make sure to have you back at some point.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you all.
Aloha and stay safe.